On October 2nd, 1979, in a federal American court, Ismael Guadalupe Ortiz decried the United States military abuse of his home, Vieques, an island part of the larger Commonwealth of Puerto Rico. He stated, "I accuse the U.S. Navy in the court of the U.S. in Puerto Rico of conspiring to commit against all Viequensians one of the greatest abuses ever brought against a people in our America. I accuse the U.S. Navy and its legal arm, the federal court, of expropriating and throwing into the street thousands of human beings that live on these lands and that now the Navy claims is theirs." Despite such an accusation, Ortiz was on trial as a defendant for his activism in the Fisherman's War. Months earlier, on the beaches of Vieques, United States naval officers had violently arrested Ortiz and 20 other men and women peacefully protesting U.S. naval occupation of the island. The protesters were members of the organization the Crusade to Rescue Vieques, a coalition of fishermen, teachers, merchants, and other working-class peoples and activists demanding the eviction of the U.S. Navy from the island. In 1941, the United States and its armed forces took over 72% of Vieques. The U.S. Navy evicted hundreds of Viequense families, forcibly removing any resident who attempted to remain in their home, and eventually bulldozing homes and agricultural plots that stood in the way of the Navy's industrialization and growth on the island. Appearing before the federal court in Puerto Rico, Ismael Guadalupe Ortiz recounts the toll of this military action on the island. "My own parents were victims of this expropriation, and I call to the stand women who had to give birth in cane fields because the birth coincided with the passage of the bulldozers that were knocking down their houses. And I call to the stand men and women who woke up without a piece of land to cultivate for their own family's sustenance." From the 1940s to the early 2000s, the U.S. Navy carried out extensive, controlled bombings off the coasts and forced the people of Vieques onto an increasingly small sliver of land. The bombings caused great damage to the already fragile marine ecosystem, and fishermen, their families, and the civilian population that relied on the fish markets for sustenance and economic well-being faced increasingly unbearable financial hardship. In 1978, hundreds of local fishermen began blocking and disrupting the maneuvers of the U.S. Navy. United under material and local struggles, community leaders founded the Crusade to Rescue Vieques to support the fishermen on land. The diverse coalition organized nonviolent direct action, celebrations of fishermen and local culture, and vandalized several naval boats and vessels. At the heart of the Crusade's activism was a demand for peace. At his testimony, Ortiz declared, "I do not want my children or any other child of my small island to live on a land bombed and shot at wildly by foreigners. I do not want them to have a drunken Marine Corps humiliating and abusing them on their own land. I hope for my children and for their little friends the abuses of today will be a thing of the past. This is why I fight." As the Fisherman's War gained international media attention, Puerto Ricans and other activists came to the island to support the cause. Yet on May 19, 1979, Ortiz, along with 20 others, were arrested for protesting in a military zone. However, only 2 were actually from the island. As the trials played out, the media and the United States government would frame the protest and the entire movement as anti-American communists. In this light, military repression and violence became a more viable solution for protecting the interests of the United States. The Fisherman's War ended in 1983 as Puerto Rican officials came to an agreement with the United States Navy, and the Crusade faded away. Unfortunately, the Navy continued its presence on the island and continued conducting controlled bombings until 2003. At the end of his speech, Ortiz, knowing one day Viequenses would be free, exclaimed, "This court can send me to prison today, but outside remain thousands who will continue the struggle, which is the struggle of all."